let's do it right now. Welcome in the one of our favorites, and certainly the favorites of Winnipeg Jet fans. Maybe he can talk us off the ledge, put some sense into these conversations, or maybe he'll just pour gas on the fire. Let's see right now. Welcome to the program. A belated happy birthday as well to the birthday boy who was feted across social media by so many yesterday. What's going on? How are you?
Hey, I am doing just fine. Happy to have successfully aged another year. Happy to be here as well. Glad you're part of my life. So, yeah, let's do this. What do you want? What do we want?
Well, we want to win on Friday night, to be honest. That's where I'd like to start, to be frank. Yeah, I mean, what did you make of Monday? Let's just talk about Monday's game for a minute, because it was so strange. I mean, you're a guy that deals a lot in analytics and a lot in numbers, and if you did not see anything of the game and just went and fired up Natural Stat Trick and took a look at the shot share and chances and all those things, you would have thought, well, how in this world did this game go the way that it did? But I mean, to me, it was a bit of a different look if you were in the building or watching the game on television, because as we've known, all shots were not created equal. And the Winnipeg Jets just seem to be having a hell of a time earning the ice and the space to be in the spot where you score goals last night. I mean, what did you think about Monday?
I thought it was the least dominant 46-15 shot clock game you will ever see in your life. I know that they took a lot of shots. I can think of Blake Wheeler. I think it hits the goalie's shoulder, then the top of the net, and it just bounces over. I can think of that first shift in the third period with Connor, Scheifele, and Wheeler, where it looked like they could score. But you look at that sheer volume of shots, the shot attempts, all that sort of stuff, and those were the only moments where I really, truly, sincerely believed that the Jets had a goal in them. You know, Arizona parked the bus, sure. They didn't generate themselves, sure. But I didn't believe, because like you say, I mean, you look at the numbers, it says one thing, but games have feels too, right? Like, I mean, that game had this sensation that Winnipeg they were all over the zone, but they were on the perimeter of the zone, and they weren't getting to the blue paint, and they weren't getting to the middle of the ice outside of a couple of chances. And I think that getting goalied by the Arizona Coyotes, a team whose goalie doesn't have a headshot on his NHL.com page, is the sort of thing worthy of criticism, no matter how many shots you get.
Absolutely. Just while we're talking about Monday, because I think we'll take it from this, you know, they've got a couple days off, practice tomorrow, big game on Friday, hoping to change the mood around the city heading into a big game for the team and their captain on Sunday night when Blake Wheeler plays 1,000. You've spent a lot of time asking Paul Maurice questions after games. What did you think about his answers and his demeanor after one of probably the most frustrating nights of his coaching career? And that's a long one on Monday at Canada Life Center.
Yeah, there's one thing about it I really like, and then one thing that I don't. So let's start with the positives. The thing that I liked was that he doesn't have a sky is falling approach to the team right now. And I know they've lost 5 of 6. I know they got blown up by Minnesota. And I know that they got, in my mind, embarrassed by the Arizona Coyotes the other night. But on the whole of it, on the real sum aggregate total of it, they're a pretty good 5-on-5 team most of the time. They have their mistakes. They have their issues getting to the middle of the ice at certain times. But it's night and day compared to last year. The problems they have now are better problems to have. I was going to call them good. I don't think that they're great problems, but like, they're in the zone struggling to get to those dangerous areas and finish right now. They're sometimes, maybe not as well against Arizona, but sometimes they're in the middle of the zone getting the chances and not finishing them. A year ago, when the Jets lost 7 in a row, they didn't have the privilege of figuring that stuff out because they were so buried in their own zone. They were so pushed around at 5-on-5 that they weren't even able to get the puck in transition, going the right way to get in that situation. And that was a sky is falling moment. Those Jets were playing poorly in a way that, you know, I think was worthy of fervent criticism. I don't see that. I just see the frustration now that's built in because they're losing a lot. And so Paul Maurice not taking a sky is falling approach, I respected that because they've been over this stretch, a solid 5-on-5 team. Power plays let them down. Definitely it has. Shorthanded, let them down most of the season. It's been good for a couple of games now. So that's what I liked. The thing that I didn't like was that he's talking about a day of rest being really important and vital for the team right now. And he was suggesting that today we would find out, or over the next couple of days after that game, we would find out who's, bangs and bruises, needed a little bit of extra rest. And certainly they had a day off, then an optional. He's talking about all the, we're hearing about time zones again from the Jets, and we're all of that sort of stuff, talking about fatigue against the Arizona Coyotes on a night when his top line plays 22 minutes and his fourth line plays 4. So the sheer contrast between what you offer as an explanation, admitting that, what he says to us may not be what he says in the room, and how the lines were actually deployed. It seemed like a desperate team turning it into a top 9 game, not getting the results, and then sort of blaming fatigue that was inevitable for not getting those results. I just didn't like that as an explanation, especially given the way the minutes were doled out.
It made no sense. And we talked about a number of things yesterday, kind of still somewhat bent from walking out of that arena on Monday night, as one would imagine. But you just nailed it. I mean, for a group, and to be honest, I thought the fourth line did a lot of good things when they were out there. Now, granted, part of it was the amount of power play time that the team had, especially in that third period. And yes, they're down a goal, and yes, they need one. But I mean, you're going up against a glorified American Hockey League team that was doing absolutely nothing in the other way. It seemed like they were almost trying to, I don't know, it was the square peg, round hole analogy at some point. I mean, just trying to keep on pushing the same thing over and over again with the same lack of success. I was not critical of Maurice for the way he changed the lines over the course of that Los Angeles game. I figured, there are times and places where, you shake things up, you get the blender out, and, you see if you can get a little bit of a different look. Now, again, it was Dylan DeMello shorthanded that ended up scoring that goal. I mean, I don't think it really was a direct correlation of any of the line changes, but whatever. At some point, you do a few things, you get the win, and then they went in and played very well against Edmonton. And I mean, I know a lot of people were freaking out that Svechnikov wasn't playing with Dubois and Connor, but I think there was a lot of things to like from that. From there, though, we've seen the law of diminishing returns in a big, big way, Murat. And considering the way that hockey game was going and the amount of things that were technically going right, but the lack of success and real legitimate grade A scoring chances, in my opinion, I was surprised that there wasn't some more changes. Were you at all in that game, even though they were thoroughly dominating the game in just about every category that we look at?
Well, I'll get this out of the way first and foremost. I'm not a big fan of Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, and Blake Wheeler as a line. And the reason that I'm not a fan is really results-based, including their big game against Calgary. They've been outscored 48-43 at 5-on-5 over the last 3 years. That is not Bergeron, Pasternak, and Marchand. That's not Crosby and Malkin. This is not a top line of dominance. This is not the nuclear option, but it gets treated like one. We discuss it like one. It's supposed to be you go to that group because you need the win. And some of those goal-based numbers are going to look worse than maybe the line would be because the defense was such a mess over these last few years. Like, that's part of it, to be sure. But if they are your number one option, they should be able to overcome that to a certain degree, should they not? And when you see them get stagnant, it's because they cycle on the wall and never find that route into the middle. And I think that worked a little bit when Scheifele and Wheeler were the absolute dominating drivers of that line. But now that Connor is the most effective offensive player, as he's been this season, I think he would benefit from a different style than that grinding perimeter game. And I liked him with Pierre-Luc Dubois. So that's my preface, is that I don't think of them as the nuclear option. At the same time, when Winnipeg had every excuse to phone it in, going down 2 goals early against Calgary after it had gone down 2 goals early against Minnesota, it was that line that drove the comeback. And it was Kyle Connor, I thought, who really drove the comeback. It seemed like every rebound, every battle, he was in it on the offensive zone. He decided he wanted to get the puck back, so he did, and then they scored. So I have a lot of time for that. And then the one time, like I say, against Arizona, where I thought Winnipeg may actually break that goose egg against the goalie whose name I cannot pronounce, it was that line as well. So right now, this group that I don't look to as the default number one line might be a good group to keep together, because at least you can point to them getting those kinds of chances.
Well, I'll say this. I think we could definitely say that about Pierre-Luc Dubois and Kyle Connor with whoever was on their line, to be honest. I mean, last week we got into it and I said, hey, to me, everything's on the table with the exception of one thing, splitting those two guys up, because I thought they were playing so well together. And to be honest, I know a lot of people, talk about Svechnikov. I think there's probably half a dozen guys on this team you could stick on that wing if Dubois and Connor are playing the way that they had and have been playing, and see some very positive results. And, maybe who goes on that line is dependent on, what you want to do with the other lines. But it's hard to argue after what we saw just over the course of this last week, Murat, that where things are at right now with the lines has benefited the team and benefited some of the players that were actually going quite well. A couple of the guys that haven't been going quite well that maybe are part of this is Nikolaj Ehlers and Mark Scheifele. And I know there's been tons of oxygen taken up on Blake Wheeler. We spent a lot of time talking about him, but let's talk about Scheifele for a minute. Hammer and I went down a number of roads with Scheif, but just your comment. I mean, he's got 2 goals through 16 games. I mean, you just mentioned it. He played 4 minutes more than Pierre-Luc Dubois, at least 2 minutes more on the power play on Monday without much to show for it. And as you mentioned in your latest column at The Athletic, I mean, he's essentially, slowly but surely, I think, playing himself off of this Olympic team, if you even thought that he was on it in the first place. What's up with Mark Scheifele?
I think that Mark Scheifele has mostly played well offensively without getting the results or becoming dominant. So Mark Scheifele has been a point-per-game player for 5 years heading into this season. His offensive qualities are known. You can point to, if you got the mental reel of multiple chances over the last week where he gets set up in the slot, somebody kicks out a toe, and he gets stoned from in close. So I'm not personally worried about Mark Scheifele's scoring. I really am not, despite the fact that we're used to this guy taking over games, whether it's on the power play or at even strength. Offensively, he should be one of the league's top 10, top 15 players. He's been that before, and I believe he'll be that again. I think the issue, though, is that upon not scoring and upon perhaps seeing Pierre-Luc Dubois really drive and sort of being forced into this extended slump, you're starting to see Mark Scheifele's bad habits come out. And whereas I thought early on in the season, he was talking about, hey, if you back check 200 feet every single time, good things will eventually happen. I thought you could point to a lot of good stuff on that front, especially in the offensive zone. His stick is great. He knocks down a lot of plays. But in the last week or so, you've seen that one extra, not a shift, but a shift within a shift. He's been on the ice for 45 seconds. The puck's going in the offensive direction. He stays on for a little bit more. That's a bad habit, and that's something we've seen from Scheifele before. We've seen him get benched for it. These are the things that creep into his game. There's the goal against Minnesota. I think it was the 4th one where he's net front. He's got that covered off. Brendan Dillon makes a curious read to sort of approach the point. But Scheifele has the net front covered off and sees Dillon in front of him. So if you see a defenseman in front of you, you got your other defenseman with you. Abandoning the net front is a curious decision, even if the puck's going in the right direction and Winnipeg gets burnt. These are things that are supposed to be gone from Mark Scheifele's game. These are the things that, with the Olympics as a carrot at the end of this year or towards the end of this year, you don't want to see from that player anymore, because we all know Team Canada is stacked. Even on an offensive basis, he's in tough with the quality of players that Team Canada has. If you look back to Team Canada's men's Olympic 2014 gold medal, I have never in my life seen a team protect the puck, support the puck, have every single puck carrier in all 3 zones, always have at least 2 options. I've never seen a team do it better than that one did. And I'm not sure if that's the archetype that this year's version wants to go with. That's a bunch of years ago now. It'll have been 8 when the tournament happens. But I don't see Mark Scheifele playing that game. I see him leaning offensively before the battle is won and not providing that extra option and sort of heading north, anticipating that offense that will come. You can trust in that. But I think it's getting hard on these guys because they're losing and he's not scoring.
Yeah, well, I think you make some great points, and maybe everything gets magnified in a big way when you're going through struggles as a team the way they are scoring goals. But for a guy that has been so successful scoring and putting up that offense, the shaking up of the lines, the trying everything, and the amount of time on the power play, which we'll get to in a minute with the lack of success, incredibly concerning. As far as lines go, and again, we don't have much from today because it was an optional practice. I imagine tomorrow will tell us much more about what the coaches have been meeting about and trying to instill in the club, the way things will look going forward. But, if it's up to you, and I know you pulled your readers on this, where do you go line-wise? And I'll put it straight up to you. Who's the first center over the boards when this game drops the puck on Friday night? Is it Mark Scheifele or is it Pierre-Luc Dubois?
Well, I'll answer that one first because to me it's the easiest one. That's Pierre-Luc Dubois. He's the one that's driving right now. He's producing right now. And he's imposing his will on games. His size and strength are an issue for teams. His speed is an issue for teams. Even when separated from Kyle Connor, you can sort of see him put defenders on his hip or on his back. And I think he's a dangerous player. So for me, Mark Scheifele has been the number one center in terms of how many minutes he gets, even at 5-on-5. Pierre-Luc Dubois has been the number one center in terms of his performance early on in this season. And I think that losing 5 and 6, I think, you can put away the getting guys going card a little bit and just go to who is going and lean on them as much as possible, I think is how I would approach this situation. In terms of the lines as well, you know what? I really did not mind Lowry, Scheifele, and Wheeler as a trio. I thought that when Scheifele had Lowry covering him off down low at times, that was a really solid group in all three zones, even if it's not a blazing fast line. Even though they didn't score, they controlled the flow of play, which I still believe matters whether you're finishing or not, because with those players, especially Mark Scheifele, I believe that they will. I absolutely believe that they will. But at the same time, if you run a line like that, then maybe you're promoting Nick Ehlers, who isn't going right now either, and he may have a hamstring issue and all this sort of stuff. I really think that the answer is probably more Pierre-Luc Dubois, more Kyle Connor, and let the chips fall where they may, because those guys are genuinely going.
Well, I agree 100% with you on that. And, the last time we spoke, we were talking about Ehlers and where he's been shooting, where his chances are, and just how, which is, to be honest, has been very similar to, a big picture look of Monday's game where, getting a bunch of shots and they're all from, another area code. I mean, nothing's close to the net. Nothing is where, you're going to have rebounds. The players haven't been in there to get rebounds and maybe a dirty goal. But it does seem like there's some struggles from Ehlers that we haven't really seen over the last couple of years. And you mentioned the potential that he's dealing with something. Overall, what do you make of Ehlers' game? And if you're Coach Paul Maurice and you believe that, I know we're talking about getting Wheeler going and getting Mark Scheifele going, I would argue that getting Nikolaj Ehlers going is as important as any of the other players on the roster that aren't going right now. What's the best route for that when we get to this weekend's games?
Well, I think it depends on what the truth is at the heart of Ehlers' struggles, because to me, he doesn't look as fast as we're used to seeing him. He doesn't look as dominant. He's certainly not scoring as much. He's certainly not getting to the middle of the ice as much as you'd like him to with that shot of his. This is a guy that has outscored every other Winnipeg Jet at 5-on-5 per minute for multiple years. So the idea that he's not going, and unlike where you can point to Scheifele getting robbed, I'm not sure I'm seeing that Ehlers robbery of late. I don't know that he's getting into those situations. So that's an issue. It's absolutely an issue. If the heart of it is in fact an injury, then you spread out those minutes and you reduce his and accept that he's not going to take over games for a while, I think. If the heart of it is anything else, if this is just a guy not going right now, well, then what can you do to actually give him, I guess, put him in good situations? Cop Stastny Ehlers has been particularly effective at various stretches this year and last. And I think that works because he's so covered off defensively. And Andrew Kopp has such a good read of his teammates in terms of where to put pucks to make them effective as well, that I think that's kind of an instant chemistry option if you wanted to go to it. If you did that, you could run Connor Dubois and your choice of Wheeler or Svechnikov on that other line as well and have some options. But you know what that takes is demoting Mark Scheifele, and I'm not sure that Winnipeg has the appetite for that for a guy that is that much of a cornerstone of their team. So the answer is, I guess, I don't know. With a hint of it depends.
Yeah, someone said that you should be a carpenter because you're hitting the nail on the head today, Murat. And the whole Ehlers thing is, and he's playing on that third line right now. He played about 15 minutes in the game before. And I'm a person that does understand that I think that there's something to be said for sort of earning that opportunity and playing well and getting to that point. But it does really seem like there's a complete double standard right now. And I think that is at the root of a lot of the frustration and a lot of the rancor, you hear for the coaching staff and so much more on as we go through. Special teams has been a massive part of this. And we've been talking about the penalty kill for the better part of this season so far. But this power play right now is absolutely killing them. And, for all the things that people didn't like on Monday night, there was nothing that was more damning for, I think, the players and the coaching staff as well, as to how that power play conducted themselves and did and didn't do things in that third period right now. This is an absolute mess. And it doesn't make sense when you think, it's not like they're missing half the guys that are normally out there. They've got everybody. They've got a better defense core they've had. Connor Hellebuyck continues to put Vezina goaltending night in and night out. How devastating has it been with the power play, and what the heck needs to happen to turn this around in your mind?
Yeah, it absolutely has been devastating because, like I said earlier, the team's pretty good at 5-on-5, which is a good thing. That's the sort of thing you can build a winner from. But special teams are costing them so many goals that points in the standings are being kind of lit on fire. And when Blake Wheeler gets high-sticked and is bleeding, has that cut, like that looked pretty painful in the postgame, I got to say, on his cheek. And Winnipeg gets a 4-minute power play, and you're like, oh, okay, third period, big guns, here we go, pull the rabbit from the hat. Hellebuyck kept you mostly in it. Well, I guess not in this particular case. That's just a memory that I have burned into me. But you have the opportunity. I believed that, this is the moment. And then I believe it's Scheifele who takes the draw. Don't quote me on that. But Winnipeg loses the initial draw, gets sent the other way. They try the entry. The one-man zone entry machine, Nick Ehlers, gets denied. Goes back the other way. Another entry attempt. I believe they go offside. And then it's their third swing at it, if you add it all up, that actually gets them inside the zone. So I think 45 seconds I'd noted had gone by before they'd even gotten in the zone established on this 4-minute power play. Then you get in the zone, and it's take the pass, dust it off, look around, make the pass. Guy who receives it, takes the pass, dusts it off, looks around. This is not the symptom of a power play that's working right now. And I think the only looks that really worked were when Nate Schmidt just looked one way past the other, Josh Morrissey's shot. And it wasn't a goal. It wasn't the greatest version of that opportunity ever. But the reason it actually looked like it might score was because he was assertive and actually did the thing instead of sizing up the whole zone. And I think Paul Maurice spoke to that a little bit, that when you see guys take time, when things aren't moving quickly, that's when power plays start to look particularly bad. And I agree with that. And if you're not getting into the zone with regularity, if you're not moving the puck quickly, if the shot that you get at the end of it isn't that dangerous because you didn't move the puck quickly, you're not going to have a good time. Like, I thought that the first time that they went back to, Scheifele in the slot, Wheeler feeding him from the half wall, he got a couple of chances. I think it was one 5-bell chance. Was it against Minnesota and another against Calgary? But I can see that pass coming up to Scheifele and him getting robbed. And I'm like, okay, that's great. That's a look that you like, but they're not scoring. And then they look as bad as they did at a critical juncture as they did. That's a problem. What can you possibly do to make it better? I don't know. Traditionally, the answer is more Ehlers, but he hasn't looked that good there. Does Blake Wheeler go to a different side so that the guys on Winnipeg's at the top of the circles are both shooting options open to their one-timer? Do we get Kyle Connor and Nick Ehlers feeding each other? What role does Scheifele play? I haven't sorted it out because I haven't been used to the idea of them struggling this badly. It's looked genuinely bad.
Well, it certainly has. And, we've seen, a few different looks, a few different combinations. But, I just go back to last year, and I remember our conversations at the end of the season where it was kind of exciting for Jet fans to see for the first time some real, legitimate competition between those two units, where you've got Ehlers on one and Scheifele on the other. And it was that second unit that was scoring at maybe a better rate. And it was really pushing the other ones right now. Man, even when there was the 6-on-4 on Monday, Murat, you're getting all the guys out there, and it just seemed like nobody had any confidence. You mentioned about doing things quickly and instinctive. It was the exact opposite right now. And I don't want to say they were skating in quicksand. I know there's been a lot of talk about time zones and how much they played. The schedule is the schedule. You're playing against the 31st ranked power play in the National Hockey League. You're down 1-0. and you have essentially half of the third period to do something with the man advantage and nothing happens. You'd have to think that, even if they weren't full out practicing today, you'd have meetings, you'd have a ton of video, and I would imagine tomorrow will be a big, big moment for the Jets preparatory wise to get ready to try to erase that come Friday night against the New Jersey Devils.
I mean, it's got to be front of mind, right? When the 5-on-5 game is mostly good and special teams cost you like a goal differential per game or whatever we're at this stage, like Winnipeg setting standings points on fire by not having them picked up. And we know that makes an impact on the end of season standings. If you look at the penalty kill alone, they're on pace to give up enough goals to be the difference between first in the Central and outside the playoffs. That'll get better. But if the power play doesn't get better, then there's an issue as well. That's got to be number one. And Winnipeg's going through it right now. I mean, I wonder if Jamie Kompon being distant from the team as he deals with that important family matter with the health of his wife and all of this sort of stuff plays a role. If the leader of this group is doing things by video, but that's really just, I mean, it makes sense to me, but that's speculation as well, because I mean, Paul Maurice is an experienced NHL coach. Whatever issues that they're having with their entries, with their execution, he should be able to handle that as well. So maybe that's not, I put that out there as food for thought. I'm not sure. But it's got to be number one on the to fix list right now, because most of the other aspects are pretty okay.
Yeah, and you bring that up, and listen, I there's always people calling for the coach in and around here. And I haven't had a lot of time for that. I mean, I figured that, and God knows we've had enough conversations about the way the team was structured, what they did well, what they didn't, what needed to change. But going into this season, it seemed like all of those excuses were done. The defense is as good as it's ever been, or at least since they went to the Western Conference Final and then Byfuglien left. The goaltending is as good as it's ever been, if not better. I mean, Connor Hellebuyck has been absolutely brilliant this year, and they're wasting some incredible performances by him. And the power play and the penalty kill are where they are. To me, those are the things that puts the most heat on a coaching staff, not to mention building up these losses, especially in regulation, and seeing your place fall down to the point where you're on the outside of the playoff spot looking in. I mean, we haven't talked a lot about this before, but what do you make? How much pressure is there on the head coach of this hockey team going into, I'm not going to say Friday night or this weekend, but this next stretch? I mean, over the course of the month of December to get this thing turned around and, put us in a spot where we kind of remember how freaked out people were at the end of November. Because honestly, Murat, if this continues to go in one direction, some sort of change needs to happen. And I mean, there's a number of ones that can take place. But we all know pro sports, maybe not as much here in Winnipeg as other places, but the coach is often the one that takes the heat and takes the bullet when things need to get shaken up.
Yeah, somebody who works in an analytics department in the NHL who I trust once told me that coaching has the biggest impact on special teams. And the idea that Winnipeg's shot quality on special teams is poor right now does reflect poorly on the coaches. Absolutely, that it does. Every time they lose, I see the mentions being like they've quit playing on the coach. I don't believe that. I don't see that. I see the effort. I think that the people who drive the bus of the Winnipeg Jets still follow, Paul Maurice on that front. I don't think that that's the issue. But you know what? The other day, somebody responded to one of my tweets about the game with, what Winnipeg might be doing right now is wasting Carey Price. You like the reference there being Montreal was a horrid team for a long time at a time where Carey Price was the best goaltender on the planet. And, prime years of this guy were just not really taken advantage of. Or you might think of, say Connor McDavid on his entry-level contract in Edmonton, which was the most cap-efficient contract you've ever seen, and they couldn't build a team around him. Is that what's happening with Connor Hellebuyck right now? I don't quite believe it, because I think the team is built pretty well. Like I say, I still think it's a pretty good team. Can you blame the coach for not getting more out of it? Well, if special teams continue to be an issue, absolutely you can. Absolutely you can. I think you got to credit him for some of the improvement at 5-on-5. That if you don't like the lines, then maybe you're looking at it as the roster improved with the team and they succeed in spite of him as well. But I like the systemic changes too. I like the way they've taken advantage of their better 5-on-5 team. The one thing is, though, you look around the league and people get fired for less struggle, right? This idea that he's in his 9th year and can look at last year's 7-game losing streak or this 5-6, or you look at the playoff results with the 2 series wins in this stretch of time. you can make a viable argument that the team could go further, or that, he has not had success to warrant this kind of invulnerability. And then the last thing I'll say, this is just a series of thoughts. I don't think there's one thesis point of it being like, yes, he should be under pressure, or no, he shouldn't. But when I spoke to Mark Chipman, as I did about a month ago, for what ended up being a horribly timed delivery of a piece, but it was a really thoughtful, articulate, intelligent piece where he's talking about the value he puts in Paul Maurice as a person. One of the things he said was, on day one, when they met, they were talking about how important continuity was. Mark Chipman believes in continuity and the value of that. And I think that it's for that reason that you're not going to see Paul Maurice just fired because they're losing right now. If ever there's that change, it'll be a concerted discussion, agreement by all parties, and they'll find, he'll have a good opportunity coming out of that, whether here, elsewhere, or what have you. I think that they'll be so conscientious because of the interpersonal relationships that they do have.
Well, and something I brought up yesterday that, like a year or two ago, the thought of like Mark Scheifele was untouchable for this club. He's on an 8-year deal. It's a very team-friendly contract that, I think they had planned. For crying out loud, Paul Maurice was talking about building a statue of the guy outside the arena afterwards. The construction has not started yet on that one, shall we say.
That might have been the moment he cursed him, just for the record, if you're looking for a touchstone.
Yeah, just like the wave in Calgary at 2-2 on Saturday night. But I'll say this, when we see what's happened with Scheifele over the last few years, coming out really, the high point of his entire career, that incredible playoff run with 14 goals in 17 games, and some of the things we still continue to talk about, the trade for Pierre-Luc Dubois, looking long-term, knowing that this contract ends, and you talked about it. You've got a really interesting piece on projecting the Jets lineup years in advance. If it's not going to be the coach, at what point does the general manager consider some, real significant shakeup of the forward group? And I brought this up to Hammer, and I've thought about this before, but didn't really bring it up publicly because I thought it was so far out of this realm of reality. But at this point, with what's happening and knowing how valuable Scheifele is, that contract, his production with 2 years left, you're not just trading that guy and not getting anything back. I do wonder if, in a month, if this team is still mired in this and they don't want to make any sort of move with the coach, they still feel that they've got the right guy. If all of a sudden the general manager doesn't start thinking about doing something that might include what would have previously been unthinkable here in Winnipeg.
That would be earth-shattering. It would be era-defining. I thought the Patrick Laine for Pierre-Luc Dubois trade really did shift eras for this team. And you start to look long-term, and everything works if Mark Scheifele and Pierre-Luc Dubois both excel. Scheifele's contract, like you mentioned, is team-friendly. And for as long as it is, as long as he can outperform that, you've got a competitive advantage over a lot of other teams, especially depending on what Pierre-Luc Dubois gets this summer. And I think that maybe for that reason, you look to see, if you're the Winnipeg Jets, I think that you look to see what Scheifele can do provided with another crack at the playoffs. I don't think that you make your earth-shattering move, and I'm just thinking aloud on this idea, in the middle of a season, especially because it's such a cap-advantageous contract. If you're on LTIR and any trade you make has to be dollar out for dollar in, even if you can line up this, I don't know, I will call it Scheifele for Couturier to incense the fan base kind of deal, right? Like, then you have to make the dollars work. And I don't know that you can do that in season for, say, the trade deadline or something like that. So I think that it continues to be, Scheifele's team in that regard. And you continue to look for him to be that guy that can make all of those things happen. But if you are the Winnipeg Jets, you're not a foolish group. You see that he is an amazing all-world top 10 offensive player, and not that, like, defensively impact-wise, he's all right. He's sometimes not that great. And that's not maybe a player that you look to give that $9-10 million deal and build around for several years in his late 20s and early 30s, in my opinion. So maybe you're onto something. I haven't thought too much about what that trade would look like, but I have time for it.
Well, and again, there's a couple more years left, but, those are the sort of conversations we'll have a little bit more if there's never any movement, come on the coaching side. And I'm not here beating the drum for that, but I guess I think it's quite obvious when you see a team with this much talent that looked the way they did at the start of the season, playing the way they have lately, with the struggles that they've had in so many aspects of the game. Some of the things that we never talked about or frankly even thought about all of a sudden are going to be brought up on shows like this. Murat, always appreciate your time. Belated happy birthday to you. Enjoy the day, and we'll look forward to catching up next week. And of course, maybe at the games on the weekend.
Love it. Thank you so much, Huss.
There he is at WPG Murat Ates of The Athletic joining us.